Hello and welcome back to Thoughts Per Episode House of a Dragon Edition. This week we are talking about Season 2, Episode 5, Regent. It's another consequences episode. It's a slower episode, but it's talking more about politics. It's exploring, it spends a lot of time exploring Damon and what he wants and his feelings and the past that he's confronting and the spooky haunted mansion of Harrenhal. And we learn that his pride, he's kind of moulding in his own pride a little bit. And he has now come to the conclusion that, yeah, I'm a king. Doesn't matter what anyone else says. I'm a king. I'm going to take over King's Landing and Rhaenyra can join me, but we'll rule together. I'm a king. Matt Smith has a surprising amount of experience playing the husbands of queens who feel overly prideful about their own position. If Damon had turned out more like Corlys, I feel like it would have saved the realm a great big headache. But yeah, while this show has dealt a lot with the idea of women and whether they are historically, in these kinds of universes, allowed to rule, and how people view them as, quote, the fairer sex and all this stuff. I feel like this episode gets a lot more overt with all of those themes. In multiple instances, we have people outright being like, well, you can't go to battle, you're a woman, and, well, Alicent can't lead us, she's a woman, and, well, no, the problem with that is, Visenya might have been a great warrior queen, but that was years ago, that was in the past, don't be getting any crazy ideas now. And so we also spend a lot of this episode exploring Rhaenyra's frustration, because while she is, of course, very, very, very different to Aegon, she also feels that same frustration as not being allowed out on the battlefield to do her part. And yeah, she talks about being frustrated that she was never raised to learn the sword despite being named the heir, which is rightly absurd. And yet she is still a dragon rider and has as much of a right, I guess, to participate in dragon fighting as anyone, until you take into account the responsibility of being a queen and needing to remain alive. It is interesting that we have just seen the Greens show a flagrant display of recklessness with their king, and yet despite that we still spend a lot of this episode exploring Rhaenyra's frustrations as to not being allowed out onto the battlefield to exact her will. Because I don't know if Rhaenyra feels this way, but if I were her, even if I knew in my heart of hearts that I was the chosen successor to the throne, I would still be feeling some measure of guilt as to the war that is being fought in my name, and the people who are dying for that cause. Like, of course, ultimately it is unfair and it's not right that the throne has been usurped by Aegon, but at the same time, there would be a whole lot less war if she was just like, fine, fuck it, I don't care anyway. Not that she should, but, I wonder if that plays in her mind a little bit. Now, speaking of aftermath, in this episode, Kristen Cole wields the severed head of Maelys through the streets of King's Landing to declare their victory and their strength, and probably also to distract from the absence of King Aegon. But as Mazaria rightfully points out in this episode, this is a terrible mistake, because when the common people see this, they don't think, oh good, we're winning. They think, oh my god, what's Rhaenyra gonna do to us next? They also remember Rhaenys and her dragon. And, if I remember right, Rhaenys was quite popular, right? I know she burst out from under the floorboards and killed a bunch of common folk and stuff, so maybe that's out the window now. But, there are probably some people, at least in that crowd, who are grief-stricken to see this dragon dead, and, ostensibly Rhaenys dead as well. The royalists will be upset. The non-royalists will just be fearful, and nothing good can come of this. And it is a little interesting that Kristen Cole does not see this reaction coming, given that he is he common born, or is he just like of a very minor house? Maybe it's to show just how far he has fallen and how he has lost sight of the perspective from which he was raised. I do like how Kristen Cole, by the way, spends most of this episode like fucking I love that moment when Alicent is trying to take charge as the regent because she fears what Aemond would do as a leader. And Also, rightfully, because she already has experience as regent. Like, while the history books would never depict her as such, she pretty much led the realm for a decent bit there. Another example of the power of women being shunned and thrown to the side in this show. And yeah, we get that moment of like, okay, well, the only person with the authority to declare a regent is the Hand of a King, Kristen Cole, and he's caught between his lover and his best mate. And of course he chooses Aemon for two main reasons. He doesn't want to give away his relationship with Alicent and his preference for her, and it would look absurd if he chose her in the context with which most of the people in that room see him. But also, more importantly, Kristen Cole watched Aemon wound Aegon, and while everyone pretty much knows that Aemon did it, it's kind of an open secret. You get the sense that there will be consequences for Kristen if he points across the table and says, this is all Aemon's fault, this is a power grab. And so he's a little terrified of Aemon, and so gives Aemon more power. Good job, Kristen. You continue to be the biggest piece of shit in the show. Well, maybe not the biggest piece of shit, because Daemon Targaryen did order the slaughtering of women and children in this episode too. But yeah, I love, by the way, I know we're kind of seesawing between different perspectives here, but I love how Alice Rivers, that's her name, it's hard to keep all the nouns straight in the show, is performing all of these spooky weirwood magics to psychologically torment Damon for the terrible choices that he's making. Although it's difficult to figure out whether she's trying to manipulate him or trying to like fix him, or maybe a little bit of both. Manipulate him into being a better person, maybe manipulate like one of the most powerful people in the realm to not slaughter a bunch of innocents and children. There's this really gross sex sequence with Damon and his mother, because this show needed even more different takes on horrifying, creepy incest. So we've definitely got some Freudian psychology going on with Damon, because later on Alice says, isn't it a shame that you never really knew your mother? And she's saying that to him as well, in terms of like, you clearly don't respect women after he's just ranted about Rhaenyra. It's like, maybe you would respect women more if you had known your mother growing up. And obviously, like, the way that he dreams about his mother is sexual, just like he sexualizes all women. And yeah, early in this season, I did wonder if, you know, maybe he did actually have some respect for Rhaenyra, and maybe he felt a little bit, you know, affronted that she just decided that clearly he had ordered the assassination of Jaehaerys, which he quite probably actually did. If not directly, then maybe he's convinced himself that that's not his fault, because he then seems very affronted when House Bracken tell him that despite everything, despite the fact that they have been brought to him, despite the fact they are supposed to be swearing fealty to him, they still, after everything, refuse to give more power to a tyrant who is happy to assassinate children. And he's like, that wasn't me. And like, it's interesting how earlier versions of Damon when he was younger used to own up to things that he never did to kind of like increase his reputation as this dangerous man. But now as he gets older and he's confronted with the mistakes of his past and the way people think about him, it's now mattering to him more that people don't see him as a monster. Like, he even says to House Blackwood, like, there are certain things the crown cannot be seen to order, but obviously everyone sees through that. And then of course we've got King Aegon, who does get to take it nice and easy this episode and just have a little nap in his bed. It is of course tragic that the only time he ever receives tender loving care and affection from his own mother is when it's too late and she is literally like horrified at what his brother has done to him, and she's holding her hand on his cheek. And I think as Alicent leaves the room he says mummy. I can't quite hear it though, but yeah, this idea that this is what it took for Alicent to see her son as her son, despite the fact of course that, you know, she's rightfully horrified of the things that her son has done in the past as well. It's a very morally complex show, isn't it? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Which came first, the trauma or the despicable act? I guess I should have said what came first, the dragon or the egg. That would have made more sense. Also, Mysaria convinced Rhaenyra to send one of her serving women to King's Landing to do some shenanigans, but we do not yet know what those shenanigans might be. I guess she's just going to be a spy? I did also like that this episode there was a little bit more of a focus on Jace and Rhaena, because clearly, you know, these are two characters who are growing in age and importance, and Jace then goes to the bridge the twins to treat with the phrase against his mother's wishes. He is, of course, yet another example of a man undermining the authority of his queen, but the ultimate outcome of that is Rhaenyra is kind of pleased with what Jace managed to, what's the term? The broker? Clearly we're at the end of the video. I've run out of words. Thank you very much for tuning in. Let me know what you thought about this episode if you like. I don't think I gravely misunderstood anything like I did last week when I thought that Aegon was dead, but hey, I think they mentioned that Sunfire was dead in this episode. They said Sunfire was a long time dying, so F's in chat for Sunfire, I guess. Poor dragon, poor Dargon. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one, or whatever I make next.